My name is Travis Mercer. I was 36 when this happened. And if you had asked me then what I believed in, I would have said rebar schedules, weather windows, torque specs, and whatever fit on a pay stub. I lived outside Oak Ridge, Oregon, in a dead-end rental at the edge of second-growth timber, and I split my year between construction and night hauling when winter slowed concrete work. I am telling you this because I know how stories like this sound when they come from the wrong mouth. Mine used to be that mouth. Most weekdays started in the dark at Dawn Diner, 10 miles from my place if the road stayed clear. I would roll in at 5:15 with mud on my boots and cedar dust in the cab, and Vera behind the counter would already have my coffee poured because she knew I drank it black until lunch, then switched to whatever was hot and bitter enough to keep my hands steady on the wheel. You could learn the whole town from that room if you kept quiet. Rig mechanics at the back booth, 2 school bus drivers by the window, 1 game warden who always sat with his back to the wall, and at least 1 logger talking, like every tree had a personality. I worked for Mercer and Lang Civil, even though only 1 Mercer was left on payroll by then, and it was me. We poured pads, walls, culverts, farm slabs, whatever came through county bids and private jobs, and in good weather, I spent 12 hours with form boards, screeds, and a laser level. In bad weather, we did repairs, equipment maintenance, and estimate runs. Then I picked up winter night loads for Hensley Timber, so my checking account did not collapse every January. I had no romance with hard living. I liked predictable pain. Back strain you could ice, numb fingers you could warm on a heater vent. Bills paid on time, truck serviced on schedule. If you handed me a weird story at the mill bar, I would hand it back with a practical explanation and probably ask if you wanted fries with that pride wound. I rented a small place on Grinwood Road where the pavement gave up and gravel took over. It had a sagging porch, 1 security light by the back door, and a view of tree line from every window except the bathroom. On clear mornings, I could see fog pooled low in the cut-over units and hear chainsaws start in staggered bursts from sectors above the creek. On wet nights, the road carried sound like a pipe. You heard trucks half a mile out. You heard coyotes across 2 ridges. You heard your own door latch louder than it should have sounded. Lena stayed over 3 or 4 nights a week, depending on her shift at the clinic in Eugene and whether my schedule made me useful company. She had a habit of leaving index cards on my fridge with reminders that were equal parts practical and bossy. Buy coolant. Eat something green. Call your father. She was not impressed by brooding, and that probably kept me from becoming unbearable. If I came home after a double shift and started talking about axle loads while standing in the kitchen like a sleepwalking robot, she would put a plate in my hand and tell me to sit down before I made a permanent decision based on low blood sugar. We were not dramatic people. We were steady until we were not. Sundays were for Roy. No exceptions unless someone was bleeding or snowed in. My father lived 20 minutes farther out in a cedar-sided house he had built himself in the late 80s, back when he still fell old growth for crews that believed risk was a sign of character. He was retired by the time I hit my 30s, though retired for him meant chopping his own firewood, fixing neighbors' generators, and sharpening tools that did not need sharpening. He had a way of looking at tree lines like they were speaking in a language he had paid too much to learn. We got along best with tasks between us. Replace a fence post, tune a chainsaw, clear brush near the propane tank, then eat chili from the same dented pot he had used since I was a kid. Conversation happened in short bursts around work. One Sunday in late November, after we finished splitting a stack of fur rounds, he stood with one glove tucked in his belt and watched the woods beyond his lower field. He said, "You hauling nights again this winter?" "Yeah," I said, "only when weather shuts pours down." He nodded once. "If the woods go quiet, come home." I laughed because that was easier than asking what he meant. "That old logger stuff again?" He did not laugh back. "Just come home." I filed it under fatherly superstition and moved on. Roy had one sealed compartment in his life. One night in 1998 he would not discuss, and I had stopped pressing long before this started. We were a family that survived by not pulling on threads that held things together. By the first week of December, rain settled in, and the schedules shifted. Construction hours got chopped by mud and freeze warnings, and I took more timber runs, mostly short hauls from decommissioned cuts above Grinwood down to yard scales near Lowell. You drove narrow roads with soft shoulders, watched your mirrors like religion, and learned every bend by muscle memory. Mile marker 14 had a hard right near a washout patch where the mountain crowded the road, and the trees came too close to your headlights. That corner mattered later. At first it was just another spot where you downshifted and kept moving. My week had a rhythm that made sense to me. Monday concrete prep, Tuesday rain out and equipment checks, Wednesday overnight load, Thursday sleep in 2 pieces, Friday pour if weather allowed, Saturday errands, laundry, chain tightening, truck wash if I had energy left, Sunday with Roy. I lived by lists because lists did not lie. Complete line item, move to next one, get through winter. The first thing that broke pattern was the dogs. On my road and the 2 roads feeding into it, people kept dogs for reasons that were practical first and sentimental second. Heelers, mixes, old shepherds with white around the muzzle. At dusk, they usually barked at trucks, deer, raccoons, wind, and each other. It was a loud neighborhood by rural standards. Then it was not. Over 3 nights, I noticed the same shift. After full dark, barking stopped all at once, not tapering, just cut off. If I stepped onto my porch and listened, I could hear engines from the highway and rain ticking in the gutters, but no dogs calling back and forth. Once, close to midnight, I heard one dog make a thin, keening noise from inside a house across the draw. The kind of sound you hear at a vet clinic when an animal is cornered by a smell it cannot avoid. Porch lights clicked on up and down the road, then off again. No one came out. I told myself it was weather pressure. Animals get odd before storms. I told myself people had started bringing them inside because of the cold. That tracked, mostly. It just did not explain why they whined at doors like something was pacing outside the line where the light ended. 2 days later, I passed the first deer carcass near a skid road, turnout above Sector C. At dawn, with sleet coming down, details flatten into gray and brown. But you still see what does not fit. No drag marks. No signs of feeding like I had seen from cougar kills when I was younger. Bones looked cracked in ways that seemed wrong for a vehicle strike. I stood there with my gloves tucked under my arms, trying to map damage to known causes the way I would diagnose a failed form tie. I came up empty, got back in the truck, and went to work. By Friday, there were 3 more, all in places where deer usually crossed toward lower clearings. Then there were none at all in the clearings, even on my drive to Dawn Diner. where I usually had to brake twice for does, near the ditch. The shoulders stayed empty. At lunch on site, I mentioned it to Cam, our foreman, while we sat in the cab with the heater running and steam fogging the windshield. "You seen what is up with the deer out by Grinwood?" I asked. He peeled open a jerky packet and shrugged. "Cougar got bold, happens. Does not look like cougar." He gave me a sideways look, then a bear with a bad attitude. "Travis, you need sleep." "It is not just that. Dogs are acting weird." Cam snorted. "Mountain fever. You haul all night, pour all day, then go home and listen to ghost stories from old men. Take Sunday off and drink water." That would have been the end of it in most years. But the same afternoon, my truck CB started catching a burst of dead static near mile marker 14. Not regular interference, not chatter clipping in and out, just a hard wall of white hiss that lasted maybe 8 seconds every time I hit that bend. Clear before it, clear after it. Same spot, same sound, night after night. By the third occurrence, I started testing it. I changed channels. Same hiss. I turned squelch down, same hiss. I ran with the unit off, then powered it on 50 yards before the marker. Still got that abrupt wash like someone had pressed noise straight into the speaker. Once it hit so hard I flinched and clipped the shoulder with my right rear tire. There was another detail, and this is the one I hated admitting even to myself, because it sounded like the beginning of bad fiction. The air at that bend carried a smell I could not classify cleanly. Wet fur, yes. Rot, maybe. But there was a metallic edge to it, like old pennies left in rainwater and hot engine parts. It came and went in a narrow stretch, then disappeared as soon as I passed the washout patch. I checked for dead livestock downslope with a flashlight one night and found nothing except wet brush and fresh mud. The next morning at Dawn Diner, old Jeb Nolan from the mill sat 2 stools down and said chainsaw crews were refusing first light starts in Sector C. He said it in the plain tone people use when they do not want to be heard saying it. "They keep hearing steps circling camp before dawn," he said, stirring sugar into coffee he did not sweeten. "Not 4 beat, 2 beat, heavy." Vera rolled her eyes from behind the register. "Men hear one branch snap and become poets." Jeb lifted his shoulder. "Call it what you want. They are not going back in before sunup." I did what I always did. I built a ladder of normal explanations and climbed it one rung at a time. Poachers dumping carcasses to keep wardens off another area. Wounded bear moving strange and aggressive. Kids with too much time planting fake tracks. Stress from split shifts making me pattern match random noise into a story. Every rung had some logic. None of them held long once I tested them against what kept repeating. That evening, just after 7, Lena stood in my kitchen reading one of her own index cards, while I tightened a flashlight mount on my dash. "You are spiraling," she said. "You know that, right?" "I am documenting," I said. "You are losing sleep and making links that are not there. Your dad says one spooky sentence, and now every quiet dog is a warning sign." I set the screwdriver down harder than I meant to. "Roy stopped answering calls after sunset this week." She looked up at that. "He does that sometimes." "Not like this." She came over, put her palm flat on my chest, and held it there until my breathing settled. "Then check on him in daylight. Do not go chasing shadows on logging roads at midnight to prove a point to yourself." I wanted to argue, but she was not wrong about my tone. I had started talking faster, sleeping lighter, and scanning tree lines without deciding to. Still, when she left for an early shift, I sat at the table with a legal pad and wrote 3 columns: observed, assumed, verified. I listed every incident and forced myself to sort fact from interpretation. Observed: dogs quiet after dark, then whining indoors. Observed: deer absent from roadside, unusual carcass damage. Observed: CB static burst near mile marker 14 at same bend. Observed: persistent odor localized to one road segment. Observed: crew reluctance for pre-dawn starts in Sector C. Assumed: predator activity. Assumed: weather behavior change. Assumed: fatigue effects. Verified: nothing yet. By midnight, the rain had thinned to mist. I drove empty up Grinwood with my high beams low and my windows cracked an inch despite the cold, trying to catch scent changes before the heater swallowed them. The woods on both sides looked ordinary and unreadable at once. Rows of trunks and brush and cut banks. All of it familiar enough to lower your guard and strange enough to keep your hands tight on the wheel. At mile marker 14, the static hit again, hard and sudden, filling the cab with white hiss. The smell came with it, wet fur and metallic rot. Then both dropped away as I cleared the bend. I did not see anything that night. That was almost worse. I pulled over at the next turnout, killed the engine, and listened. No dogs, no night birds, no wind in branches above the road. Just cooling metal ticking under my hood and my own pulse in my ears. Roy's sentence came back to me then, stripped of all the easy sarcasm I had used to keep it harmless. If the woods go quiet, come home. I started the truck and headed down the mountain, but I did not go home. I drove straight to his place to see if his porch light was on. The porch light was on, but only the porch light, a hard yellow cone on wet boards, with the rest of the house dark as cut stone. I pulled in too fast, gravel spitting against the wheel wells, and Roy opened the door before I cut the engine. He was already in boots and his old canvas coat, one hand on the door frame, the other holding a flashlight he had not switched on. "You called?" I asked. He shook his head once. "No." "You got my messages?" "Phone's inside." That was Roy's way when he was trying not to answer the real question. I stepped out and the quiet hit me clean. No wind through cedar tops, no frogs by the ditch, no dog 3 properties over that always barked at headlights. Even the creek below his field sounded muted, like someone had thrown a blanket over moving water. Roy looked past me toward the road, not at me. "You smell it?" I hated how fast I answered. "Yeah." He turned and walked back into the house without another word, and I followed him into the kitchen where a lantern sat lit on the table and next to a paper map, 2 mugs, and his old bolt-action rifle laid out with the bolt open. That image bothered me more than anything I had seen on the road. Roy cleaned tools for fun, but he did not stage weapons in his kitchen unless he expected to use them. He pushed 1 mug toward me. Coffee, black, already poured. "You should not be out tonight. I came to check on you. I know why you came." He tapped the map with 1 thick finger, marking mile marker 14, the Grinwood Bend, then a circle around his property in Sector C. "You started hearing static there." I stared at him. "How did you know that?" "Same as before." The way he said before closed my throat. For years he had sealed that night in 1998 behind silence and shrugged jokes, and now he was speaking around it like it had happened last month. I wanted to force it open right there, ask for every detail, but something scraped outside along the siding, low and deliberate, and both of us stopped breathing for a second. Not claws on wood, weight on gravel, step, pause, step. Roy did not look surprised. He only spoke softer. Do not go to the window. The noise moved along the wall to the back corner, then stopped. A long 10 seconds passed. 20. My pulse was loud enough to feel in my teeth. Then it resumed, circling toward the woodshed behind the house. Roy moved to the mudroom and handed me a second flashlight. Stay on my left, he said. No running unless I run. We stepped onto the back porch into mist so fine it looked like dust in the light beam. The woodshed door stood half open. Roy had closed it earlier. I knew because he had that habit of checking latches twice. The beam caught fresh gouges on the door edge, 4 parallel marks cut through paint down into raw wood at chest height on me, higher than chest on him. The grooves were narrow and deep, each one clean as if made in one pull. He did not swear. Roy rarely did. He only said inside, now. We backed in and latched the mudroom door. I glanced through the small square window and saw nothing except black trees and a slice of field reflecting porch light. I wanted it to be a bear because bears fit the world. Bears left signs we understood. But bears did not open doors without noise and leave marks set exactly like fingers dragged by design. At 1:24 in the morning, the first impact hit the far side of his detached garage, a heavy thud that rattled sheet metal and made the lantern flame shiver. Then another, 2 beats apart, farther left, like something testing structure and distance. Roy went still as poured concrete. Upstairs, he said. Front bedroom. Light off. We moved through the house in darkness except for the lantern glow behind us. From the front bedroom we could see the lower field, the road, and the gap in trees where his driveway met county gravel. Nothing moved in the open. That was the worst of it. Whatever had hit the garage stayed where the porch light did not reach, where branches and shadow cut the view into useless slices. Minutes crawled. No more impacts, no footsteps. I caught myself trying to label every small sound. Heater duct tick, house settling, rain dripping from eaves. I told myself we were amped up and mapping normal noise onto fear. I told myself that twice, maybe 3 times, because if I stopped narrating logic, my mind jumped to shapes behind every trunk. Then Roy touched my forearm and angled my gaze down to the fence line at the lower field. I saw 2 points of reflection near the posts, amber green in the weak spill from the porch and barn lights. Too far apart, too high, they held steady, unblinking, then sank out of sight in a single smooth motion that did not match ducking or turning away. No branch movement, no crack of brush. Just there, then gone. Roy stepped back from the window as if he had expected exactly that sequence. "You are staying here till daylight?" he said. I shook my head. "Lena's at my place tonight." "She is not now," he said. "She texted at 10 that she was taking an overnight at her sister's because of clinic call coverage. I told you when you came in." He had, and I hadn't absorbed it through the adrenaline. Relief came and went so fast it almost made me nauseous. We sat at the kitchen table until dawn with lights off and lantern low. No more impacts came. At first light, we walked the property with tape measure, camera, and a 5-gallon bucket, turned upside down to cover one clear print before drizzle could soften it. Behind the garage, we found 3 tracks in mud where the drain pipe ran off. Not paw prints, not boot tread. Elongated impressions with distinct toe points and a narrow heel, each around 14 inches long by my tape, set in a line with stride spacing that made no sense for a man crossing slick ground. Near the woodshed door, the gravel was churned in a half arc as if something had pivoted hard and pushed off uphill. Roy squatted by one print and stared without touching it. "Same pattern," he said. "Long stride, no drag." "What was 1998?" I asked. He stood up slower than usual. "Night your mother was in Eugene with you at your aunt's. I was cutting storm blowdown by moonlight because I was stupid and behind on contracts. Heard nothing for 10 minutes, not one sound. Then I saw eyes above a stump line where no eyes should be. Thought it was stress. Thought I was seeing wrong. Then it ran upright across the slash and hit my truck door hard enough to dent it. I drove home and said nothing because I had no language for it that didn't sound like I had lost my mind." He met my eyes. "Do not go looking for it." That sentence should have settled the matter. It did not. The crux for me was ugly and simple. If Roy and I had both seen patterns that matched, then either we were sharing the same delusion 26 years apart, or something physical was moving through those cuts and testing houses. I could not live in the middle of those options without pushing for data. By 8:10 that morning, after I dropped Roy at his porch and promised to check in every 2 hours, I drove back up to Sector C with a shovel, plaster mix, contractor trash bags, and my old trail camera from deer season. Rain had thinned to mist again. The road shoulders looked scrubbed clean except at low points where mud held detail. At the turnout above the first carcass site, I found 2 more tracks, shallow but readable, and cast the cleaner one in a plastic form ring I made from a cut detergent jug. I took photos with a folding ruler in frame, then bagged a tuft of dark, coarse hair snagged on wire near a collapsed gate post. Could have been bear, could have been dog, could have been old debris from months back. I labeled the bag anyway. Sector C, Gate 3, 842. At 9:30, I called Cam from the cab. "You still on this?" he asked after I explained what I found. "Travis, listen to yourself. You got a weird print in mud and some fur on a fence. That is Tuesday around here. Then come look at Roy's shed door. I got a pour at 10 and 3 guys already late. If I chase every animal story in Lane County, we do not make payroll." It circled his house last night. He exhaled hard into the phone. "Then call wildlife or get sleep." I hung up because anger was pushing me towards saying things I would regret. At 10:05, I called County Dispatch and asked for a deputy to check property damage and unusual tracks. The deputy on callback, a younger voice I did not know, asked if livestock had been taken. I said no. He asked if anyone was injured. I said no. He said, "Sounds like nuisance wildlife and weather distortion in soft ground. Photograph what you have and file online if you want a report number." I pushed once, said there were gouges in a shed door, and repeated circling behavior. He gave a short pause, then warned me that knowingly filing false statements could carry penalties. That snapped something cold and practical into place. Official channels were not built for this category. If the event did not fit known boxes, it got nudged toward prank, fatigue, or exaggeration. I did what he said anyway. I submitted a property damage report on Roy's shed, attached 3 photos, omitted interpretation, and saved the confirmation number in my notes app. By late morning, I had a working list of hypotheses and failures. Black bear with mange or injury. Size and door height marks wrong. Gait pattern wrong. No claw rake, typical of standing swipes. Packs of feral dogs. Track morphology wrong. Stride wrong. Vertical eye height wrong. Human trespasser with tools. Possible in theory, but no boot traces near prints, no drag marks, no cigarette butts or wrapper trash where prankers always leave evidence. I ran each one because I needed one to stick. None did. At 12:40, I met Jeb Nolan in the Dawn Diner lot, mostly because he had actually listened the day before. We stood by his rusted pickup under the awning while rain ticked on aluminum. "You see it?" he asked. "Eyes, maybe. Prints for sure." He nodded like that was expected, not dramatic. "Talk to Don Kersey, retired wildlife officer. Lives off Old Mill Road in Lowell. If anyone will tell you what is real and what is nonsense, it is him." I drove there straight from the diner. Kersey was in his 60s, compact and broad in the shoulders, wearing a faded rain shell and mud boots. I showed him printed photos from the pharmacy kiosk in town because I did not trust phone screens for scale. He studied them for a full minute each, then looked at me over the top edge of the page. "You want me to tell you, Bear," he said. "I want accurate. Accurate is there are incidents up here nobody wants in paperwork. Decommissioned cuts, old way stations, dead-end roads near water crossings. Same pattern every few years. Livestock, nervous. Dogs go silent. People report pacing around houses, but never get clean footage because cameras fail or wash out. I logged 3 cases in my career under predatory wildlife unknown and got calls from supervisors asking why I liked wasting office time." He handed the photos back. "Do not hunt it. Do not corner it. Light and noise buy you distance. Open road buys you life." That advice sat heavy in my chest because it matched Roy, almost word for word. On the drive back, I passed mile marker 14 at 3:17 in full daylight and got a burst of static on the CB strong enough to pop through with the volume low. Same bend. Same duration. Daylight did not make it normal. It made it harder to dismiss as nerves. I spent the next hour installing the trail camera on a cedar at the edge of Roy's lower field, angled across the fence line where we had seen the eyes. I set a second one at my own rental facing the back steps and woodshed corner. Fresh batteries in both. Timestamps synced. Motion sensitivity medium to avoid branch trigger floods. I photographed the placements, noted GPS for my truck unit, and wrote everything in my legal pad so later I could not accuse my memory of editing. At 5:50, rain finally stopped, and low cloud lifted enough to expose the cut ridges. I stood on my porch with a sandwich gone stale in my hand, watching evening settle over Grinwood. One by one, porch lights clicked on along the road. One by one, dogs that had started barking at delivery trucks and passing rigs fell silent as darkness pooled between houses. It happened in less than a minute, like someone had thrown a switch. I heard paws skitter on the deck behind my place, then a sharp yelp from the neighbor's heeler 2 lots down, cut off mid-sound. I moved to the side yard with my flashlight and saw the dog, pressed against its own back door, tail tucked, eyes fixed not on me but on the tree line above my drainage ditch. It would not turn its head, just stared and trembled, making that thin, trapped whine I had heard nights earlier across the draw. Then my motion light over the shed snapped on, flooding the gravel in white. Nothing stood in the center of it, but at the very edge where light met brush, a shape slid backward into shadow, at a height no coyote or dog could manage, and the smell rolled in behind it, wet fur and metallic rot, close enough that I tasted it on the back of my tongue. The smell rolled in behind it, wet fur and metallic rot, close enough that I tasted it on the back of my tongue. And I froze, with my flashlight, half raised because my brain wanted one more ordinary answer. before it accepted what my body had already accepted. The motion light buzzed overhead. Rainwater dripped off the gutter in slow ticks. The neighbor's healer kept whining at its own door like it would rather scratch through wood than turn around. I stepped sideways to widen my angle on the brush line, then brought the beam up in a controlled sweep from gravel to fern tops to cedar trunks. Nothing. Just wet stems, blackberry canes, and the bright white cutoff where my floodlight lost reach. I took 2 more steps, feeling every piece of loose rock under my boots, trying not to make sudden noise. The healer made 1 sharp, broken bark and then went silent again. At the far edge of the ditch, above a cluster of vine maple, 2 reflections appeared at once. They were not eye-shine at ground level. They were high, fixed, and too far apart, hovering in a pocket of shadow where my light should have caught branches. Amber green, not yellow like deer, not flat silver like raccoon. They held steady at a height that put them near the top rail of my fence and a little above it, around 8 feet off the slope if my angle was right. I knew that fence height because I had replaced 2 posts myself that spring. 5 feet at the top rail. Those points sat well above that. I told myself they could be water droplets on leaves. I told myself it could be a pair of reflectors somebody left in brush. I told myself anything that kept the world in known categories. Then I moved my beam left 10 inches and right 10 inches, a test I had used while tracking deer at night to separate reflected eyes from reflective trash. Trash stayed fixed. Animal eyes tracked light. Those 2 points tracked me, not with a quick twitch, with a smooth adjustment like whoever owned them was studying me and deciding where to go next. My hands started shaking hard enough that the flashlight jittered. I switched to 2-handed grip the same way I did with a nail gun on overhead forms, elbows tucked, breath controlled. The reflections did not blink. 10 seconds passed, maybe a little more. The whole time I never saw a face around them, no muzzle shape, no ears, no shoulder line, just those 2 bright points and darkness, taking up the rest. "Roy," I said, already stepping backward toward the porch. I never took my eyes off that patch of brush while I fished my phone out and called him. He picked up on the first ring. "You seeing it?" he asked before I spoke. "Eyes," I said. "At my place. Ditch line behind the shed." "How high?" 8 feet, give or take. A pause. He breathed out once, slow. "Do not go down there. Get inside, lock both doors. Keep lights on outside and off inside. I have a camera on that corner. Leave it, you hear me? Leave it till daylight." The reflections shifted 1/2 inch, then held again. I backed onto the porch and felt the board flex under my heel. "You coming over?" "No. You come here if it breaks cover. Engine running, lights high, straight in and straight out. Do not stop for anything on that road." The eyes vanished. Not by turning away, not by stepping into brush with a rustle and branch movement. They dropped straight down out of sight in one fluid motion, fast and vertical, as if something very tall had folded at the knees and gone below the fern tops. No snap of twigs, no paw noise in wet leaves. Nothing. I stood there with my phone against my ear and listened to silence press against the porch light. "Travis," Roy said, "talk." "It just dropped," I said, "like an elevator. Inside now." I went in, locked the deadbolt, then the chain, then the back slider, even though it stuck in damp weather, and took both hands to seat. I killed the living room lamp and stood in darkness with only the outside floodlight bleeding around the blinds. My pulse hit in my throat so hard it felt like swallowing glass. At 6:11 in the evening, I opened my legal pad and wrote exactly what I had seen, line by line with no adjectives. 2 reflections, amber green, approximately 8 feet, distance approximately 30 yards. No body visible, no blink observed, tracked beam movement vertical drop, no exit sound. I did it because memory mutates under adrenaline. I did it because if I stopped writing, I would start imagining what had been attached to those eyes. The trail camera by the shed would have logged any motion in range, but stepping outside for the card felt like walking into a trap. I set a timer for 10 minutes and watched the backyard through a 1-inch gap in the blind. Nothing moved. No wind on brush. No squirrel runs. No cat. At 6:23, I put on my rain shell, opened the front door, and crossed to my truck in 3 quick steps to grab the flare gun from behind the seat and the small crowbar I used for form work. On the way back, I cut tight along the porch corner, reached the shed mount without looking into the ditch, popped the SD card, and came straight inside. Then I locked up again. Lena called at 6:37, and I answered even though part of me wanted to let every phone ring until morning. "You sound wrong," she said. "I am fine," I said, and it came out flat enough that neither of us believed it. "What happened?" I gave her the stripped version. Motion light, eyes at the ditch, Roy on the phone. No approach after that. She let me finish without interrupting, then stayed quiet for a beat. "I am not coming out there tonight," she said, "and you are not staying there alone pretending this is manageable. I have locks, I have lights. You had those an hour ago too." Her voice sharpened in that clinic triage tone she used when someone was minimizing symptoms. "Pack a bag. Go to your dad's. Send me a text when you are in his driveway. If you want me to believe you are thinking clearly, show me behavior that looks like clear thinking." I hated being handled when I was rattled, but she was right. "I will go. Now, Travis. Now." At 6:52, I made the run. Truck started clean on first turn, high beams on, no music, windows up. I narrated mile markers out loud because silence in the cab was worse than engine noise. Mile 6, bridge. Mile 8, cattle guard. Mile 10, right bend. I did not look into side roads. I did not stop. When I reached Roy's place, he opened before I knocked. Same coat, same flashlight, rifle still open on the table. He glanced at my face, then at what I was carrying. "Good," he said. "You brought flares." We sat in his kitchen with lantern light and went over details like 2 men debriefing a job site near miss. Height estimate, distance, color, duration, whether the reflections showed pupil shift, whether there was breath sound, whether dogs reacted before or after visual contact. Roy asked each question once and wrote my answers on graph paper in his block handwriting. Around 7:30, he took out a county plat map and marked 3 points. His lower field fence line, my ditch behind the shed, and the Grinwood Bend at mile marker 14. He connected them with a pencil line that crossed old cuts and one decommissioned access road I had not used in years. "Travel corridor," he said. "Ridge to water, water to ridge." I pointed at the midpoint. "Old way station." He nodded. "Used to run loads through there till they shut scales down." By 8:05, we checked both trail camera feeds on my laptop at his table. Roy's field camera showed 2 minutes of normal darkness, then a burst of static snow across the frame at 1:24 the previous night, then black screen for 9 seconds, then image return with no visible subject. My shed camera was worse. It caught me on setup at 4:14, then a delivery truck at 5:02. Then at 5:47, the file glitched into horizontal tearing. Timestamp jumped backward 31 seconds, and the next clean frame was empty gravel with the motion light already on. No eyes, no shape, just data corruption, right where I needed evidence. I stared at the screen long enough that my vision blurred. Battery issue? New batteries, Roy said. Moisture? Maybe. He did not sound convinced. I tried to build a normal explanation right there. Consumer-grade cameras fail in cold rain. Cheap sensors wash out under sudden light changes. Timestamps drift when firmware glitches. All true, all possible. None of it explained why both cameras had interference windows inside the same pattern we had been tracking. At 9:10, we did an exterior check from the porch and found nothing fresh except one set of disturbed stones near the woodshed corner, as if weight had shifted and pushed off. No clear print, no hair, no scat. The absence felt intentional, and I knew how irrational that sounded, like assigning strategy to gaps in evidence. Still, the impression stayed. Roy made up the spare room and left the hall light on, something he had never done in my adult life. I lay there in boots for the first hour, flare gun on the nightstand, listening for footsteps that never came. Around midnight, rain returned and covered every small sound with steady hiss, and I slept in short drops, waking at each branch tap against siding. Monday morning, 5:42, we walked the yard at first light. Nothing new. I drove to my place with Roy behind me in his old Ford so I would not arrive alone. We checked the ditch line in daylight. Mud held partial impressions, too blown out by overnight rain for casting, but long enough to raise the hair on my arms. I photographed them anyway with ruler reference and bagged 2 coarse hairs from blackberry thorns. Then I stripped the trail camera and put in fresh batteries again, even though I no longer trusted electronics to catch what was moving. The day stayed ordinary by force. I went to site. We set forms and drizzle. Cam made a joke about my wildlife detective phase, and I let it pass because I needed payroll more than argument. At lunch, I called Don Kersey and read him my notes. He listened, then said one line that landed hard. Eyes at that height with no body profile means it used cover on purpose, he said. That is not random movement. Tuesday went the same until night hauling hours. By 11:30, I was climbing Grinwood with a partial load under low cloud and a half moon trying to punch through. My CB stayed clear to mile marker 13, then hissed into white static at 14 so loud it crackled the speaker cone. The smell hit a second later, thick and wet and metallic, and stayed in the cab even with vents recirculating. I did not stop at the bend. I kept speed steady and took the grade up toward the old cut. But the road ahead opened to a cleared slope, where moonlight pooled in bands across stumps and slash. Fog sat low over the ground, pale against dark timber on the far side. Visibility was bad in details and good in outline, the kind of light that made distance hard but silhouette clear. At 11:48, I saw it cross. It came from the right tree line and moved left through the open cut in 6 or 7 strides, and every stride was wrong for anything I had logged, hunted, or hit with a truck in my life. Upright, hunched forward at the shoulders, head set low, then lifting as it cleared a stump row. Massive across the upper body, wider than a doorway, with arms hanging longer than a man's, and lower legs bent backward, like a canine stance grafted onto bipedal motion. It did not pick careful steps through slash. It flowed over it, place in feet, where there was no clean path, no stumble, no recovery. I hit brakes and stopped with my front axle just short of a washout patch. Headlights washed the near slope, but not the far line where it entered trees. For half a second it turned broadside against pale fog and moonback, and scale locked into my head like a measurement on a blueprint. 7 feet at least in that posture. More if fully extended. Shoulders blocky, neck too upright. Not a bear on hind legs, not a man in gear, not any known animal translating cleanly from quadruped to upright gait. Then it disappeared between trunks and the cut went still. My whole body reacted in layers. First cold in my hands, then heat rising behind my ears, then a deep shaking in my thighs that made the brake pedal tremble under my boot. I put the truck in neutral and drew one long breath through my nose, counting to 5 on the intake and 7 on the exhale, the way Lena had taught me for panic. It helped enough to keep me functional. I should have turned around right there. I did not. I inched forward 10 yards to where I could see the crossing line and shined my handheld spotlight out the driver window. The beam caught cut stumps, broken branches, and one fresh impression in wet slash where weight had driven into pulp and exposed pale wood beneath. No body, no eyes, just aftermath. "Come on, Travis," I said out loud, voice thin in the cab. It was lighting. It was angle. I repeated that as if repetition could make physics agree with me. Lighting, angle, fatigue, moon illusion. I stacked each explanation and watched each one fail against the same hard facts. Speed over unstable debris, posture, scale, line of travel, silence. Between impacts. My mind wanted a known box. The thing I had seen did not fit one. I keyed the CB to test signal and got only static. I tried my phone, 1 bar, then none. I checked mirrors because suddenly every dark shape behind me mattered. Empty road. At 11:56 I rolled forward through the cut and did not look left again until I hit lower grade near county line. My hands stayed locked at 10 and 2 so tight my knuckles hurt. I narrated road details to stay anchored. Bridge rail, culvert marker, split fir by the ditch. When I reached paved stretch, I realized I'd been holding my shoulders up near my ears the whole way down. I parked at the Lowell fuel stop under full canopy lights and sat with the engine idling while rain started again. Fine needles across the windshield. I wrote the siding in my pad before memory could sand off edges. Upright silhouette, clear-cut crossing, wrong limb geometry, estimated height 7+, speed high on slash terrain, no vocalization. I underlined one phrase twice, not a bear. By the time I pulled out, midnight had passed and the cloud ceiling dropped low enough to erase the ridges. I drove the rest of the route on habit and arrived home just before 2, then stayed in my truck another full minute with the dome light off, watching my own porch and telling myself what any practical man would tell himself after a bad visual on no sleep. You saw shadow and fear did the rest. You saw a trick of moonlight on cut stumps. You saw nothing that belongs in daylight. I said it until the words went flat, and none of it felt true. I said it until the words went flat, and none of it felt true. Then I killed the engine and listened through the ticking metal for 30 full seconds before I reached for the door handle. Cold air hit hard when I stepped out, wet enough to bead on my eyelashes. My porch light was still on. My motion light over the shed was off. No movement on the gravel, no shift in the brush line. Nothing except rain tapping the hood and the faint hum from a transformer 2 houses down. I took my keys in my left hand, flare gun in my right, and crossed to the porch without turning my back to the ditch. Halfway up the steps, I heard it. Not a growl, not brush movement, breathing. It came from the dark above the drainage line, about 70 yards out by my guess. Deep and wet, 3 pulses close together, and then a pause, like an old compressor cycling under load. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. I had heard that rhythm once through the truck window near the cut and talked myself out of it. At my own house, with no engine noise to blame, there was nothing to hide behind. I stepped back off the porch and moved to the truck again, slow, keeping the flare gun up. My work light was clipped behind the seat, a portable flood with a magnetic base I used on late bind checks. I yanked it free, thumbed it on, and the beam hit the yard in a hard white rectangle that made every rain drop look like sparks. For a second, I saw only grass, fence posts, and the top of the ditch bank. Then the light caught texture where texture should not have been. Fur. Dark, coarse, clumped with rain. It stood partly behind a leaning alder, upper body angled toward me and lower body hidden in brush. The shoulders were massive, even crouched, and the head sat forward on a neck set too upright for any wolf I had seen. An elongated snout pushed into the spill of light, slick with water and strands of saliva that hung and swayed when it breathed. One hand rested on the alder trunk at chest height on me. Hand, not paw. Long digits, black curved claws, each one long enough that I could imagine it punching through a tire sidewall with one rake. The claws were not spread in panic. They were placed, controlled, tips biting bark like anchors. Its ears were triangular and moving on their own. Left ear angled toward my truck, idling memory fresh in the yard, right ear toward me. Then both flicked toward the road when a distant engine turned over near the highway. Independent tracking. Intentional. I wanted to call it a bear so badly I almost said it out loud, but bears did not hold their hands like that. Bears did not keep their heads level while listening in 2 directions. Bears did not watch door hardware. The beam trembled when my arm shook, and the thing shifted with it, not retreating, just adjusting for line of sight. The eyes turned into full color in the light now, amber with a green edge, reflective but not blank. It looked at my front door deadbolt area, then at the truck's driver handle, then at the chain binder hanging from the side rail, then at the flare gun in my hand. That sequence took maybe 2 seconds. It felt like being inventoried. My body dropped into survival mode so fast it was almost mechanical. I backed to the truck, set the work light on the hood facing the ditch, opened the driver door with my left hand, and kept my right arm extended with the flare gun until my knee hit the seat. I got in, locked all doors, and hit high beams. The thing did not bolt. It eased 1 step back into fern shadow, still visible from the shoulders up, then lowered just enough that only eyes and the top line of the snout stayed in view. At 2:19 in the morning, I called Roy. He answered on the second ring. Where? My driveway, 70 yards. I have a full partial on it. Talk me through what you see. I gave him details in short bursts while I watched the beam line, snout length, fur texture, claw shape, ear motion, breathing rhythm. He did not interrupt until I said it looked at the door handles and my flare gun. Then his voice changed. Leave now. If I move, it may close distance. If you stay, it learns your timing. Leave now, Travis, straight to me. The thing rose a little, enough to show part of the chest. Muscles moved under wet fur in rolling contractions with each 3-beat breath. No vocalization, no challenge display, just assessment. I put the truck in reverse and eased back, tires crunching gravel louder than they should have. The thing tracked the movement with its head and took 2 side steps parallel to my driveway, keeping rough distance, using brush cover like it knew exactly where my light died. When I hit the road and swung toward Roy's place, it moved uphill in a single smooth bound and vanished behind cedar trunks. No crash through brush, no snapping limbs. Gone between one heartbeat and the next. I drove with both hands locked on the wheel and my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The CB spat static near mile marker 14 even though I never took my eyes off pavement. I did not test channels, I did not slow. By 2:41 I was in Roy's driveway again, lights washing his porch posts. He met me outside with the rifle slung and a thermos in his hand. I stepped out and nearly dropped the flare gun because my fingers had cramped around the grip. "You saw enough this time," he said. "Yeah." "Inside." In the kitchen, he made me sit, then pushed a mug across the table and waited until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold it without sloshing. I gave him a full pass while he wrote, down to which ear moved first, and how many breaths I counted before I backed out. When I finished, he tapped the pencil against the page and stared at the map we had marked earlier. "It is not wandering," he said. "It is running pattern." I rubbed my face and looked at his notes. "Pattern around what?" "Around you, me, and that corridor." We sat in silence for a minute, and I kept hearing that wet 3-beat breathing in the pause between refrigerator cycles. Roy stood, went to the mudroom, and came back with a plastic tub from his closet. Inside were old photos, faded maps, and one dented truck mirror wrapped in a shop towel. He unwrapped it and set it on the table. The back of the mirror housing held 4 deep grooves in parallel arcs. "From 1998, he said. "I kept this because part of me thought if I threw it out, I would convince myself I made the whole night up." He slid one of my printed shed door photos beside it. The spacing was close enough to make my stomach drop. At 3:26, Lena called. Roy looked at my phone and nodded for me to answer. "You are not at your place," she said before I spoke. "No, I left. I saw more tonight." "How much more?" "Enough." A long breath on her end. "I am coming to your dad's at daybreak. Do not drive anywhere alone before I get there." "You do not need to come into this." "I am already in it," she said, voice tight but steady. "Text me if anything changes in the next hour." She hung up before I could argue, which was probably good because I had nothing useful to counter with. By 4:10, the rain tapered off. Roy and I ran a short exterior sweep with floodlights from his porch and did not leave the cleared yard. Nothing moved. No fresh track readable in the gravel. No sound except drip and distant water. We went back inside and waited for first light with the map open and both trucks parked nose out. At 6:37, with low gray dawn spreading through the trees, we convoyed to my rental. Roy in front, me behind, hazard lights on so we stayed tight if one vehicle stopped hard. My front door was still locked. Back slider still latched. No broken glass. The first sign sat in plain view on the porch mat. My right work glove. Not a pair. Just the right. I had left that glove on my truck console when I came home after Lowell. I remembered because I had pulled it off at the fuel stop to write in my legal pad and never put it back on. Now it sat centered on the mat, like it had been placed there. Fingers pointed at my door. Roy crouched beside it without touching. "Do not pick that up yet." He photographed it from 3 angles with my phone while I scanned the yard. The truck looked closed. Windows up, doors locked. My work light still clung to the hood where I had left it. Dead battery now. When I checked the cab, the glove's mate was gone. We started a methodical walk, 1 perimeter ring at a time, along the side of the house beneath my bedroom window. Mud held partial impressions, with elongated toe points and deep pressure at the forefoot, like weight loaded forward. At the shed corner, the trail camera mount hung empty. The screw bracket was still in the cedar. The camera was gone, not broken on the ground, not knocked into brush. Gone. I felt a slow, cold anger under the fear then, not hot panic, something worse. This was no longer random proximity. It had been at my house while I was away and had removed the one thing pointed at its likely approach path. A bear could damage gear. A person could steal gear. But a thief would take tools, fuel cans, anything worth money. Nothing else was missing. On the back steps, tucked under the second riser where I kept spare tie-down straps, we found the trail camera SD card. It was bent nearly in half, not snapped clean, surface gouged by pressure points, too narrow for pliers. The plastic looked pinched rather than cut. Deliberate ruin. At 7:02, Lena pulled in, stepped out in scrub pants under a rain jacket, and took one look at my face before she turned to the porch mat and the glove. "What am I looking at?" she asked quietly. "Message," Roy said. Lena did not flinch at that word. She crouched, eyes moving from glove to empty camera mount to the tracks by the wall. Then we stopped pretending this is wildlife nuisance. We brought her inside and went over everything at the kitchen table. She listened without interruption, hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from. When I described the eye movement tracking my door handle and flare gun, she closed her eyes once and exhaled through her nose. "It has a map of your habits," she said, "or it is building one." I had no good argument against that. At 7:41, I made 2 calls from speaker with Roy and Lena present, so details stayed straight. First to Cam, telling him I would not run nights until further notice and needed daylight-only assignments. He started with pushback about schedules, then heard my tone and shifted. "You sound like you got hit by a truck," he said. "Take today. We will figure coverage." Second call to County Dispatch to update my existing property report with additional damage and stolen equipment. The same deputy callback tone came through, polite and distant. I gave exact facts only. Removed camera, damaged media card, unusual tracks photographed. He said an officer could stop by when available, which in practice meant maybe eventually. I asked for the update number and wrote it down. Outcome uncertain but logged. At 8:20, we did a controlled evidence pass before weather could erase more. Roy handled measurements while I photographed with ruler and orientation shots. Lena bagged the glove and SD card in separate freezer bags, labeled date, time, location, and collector initials like chain of custody forms at her clinic. We cast one clearer track by the ditch with plaster from my truck kit and set it under a tub while it cured. When we lifted it at 9:03, the impression showed 4 forward toe points and a narrow heel with pressure ridge on one side, asymmetrical like a gate compensation. Roy ran his thumb along the edge without touching the print surface. "Right side loading heavy," he said. "Could be old injury." The note hit me because The silhouette I had seen crossing the cut had seemed to dip slightly on one stride as it exited the trees. Small detail, but it fit. By 9:30, cloud broke enough to throw flat light into the yard. I walked to the edge of my ditch and looked up toward the cedar stand where I had seen the partial view. In daylight, it looked ordinary again, a tangle of wet fern and alder. No clear lanes, no obvious place for a body that size to stand unseen. I knew better now than to trust ordinary. I realized then that the deepest fear was not just what it could do physically. The deeper fear was that it could wait, watch, test, and select. It had tracked locations that mattered to me, approached when I was depleted, and touched objects tied to my routines. It had not rushed blindly. It had learned. I stood there with mud at my boots and the ruined SD card in my pocket, and the shape of the situation finally settled into one hard sentence I could not soften. I was not sharing space with a stray predator. I was being hunted. I was being hunted. And saying it out loud changed the way the yard looked. Roy followed my line of sight to the cedars and gave a short nod like he had reached the same conclusion years ago and hated hearing me catch up. Lena stood on the porch with her arms crossed tight against the rain, not from cold, from control. She looked from me to the tracks and back again. Then we stopped giving it choices, she said. At 9:47 that morning, we moved through my rental in a tight sequence, no wandering, no separate rooms, no one stepping outside alone. Roy took windows and tree line. I packed a duffel with clothes, meds, charger, payroll paperwork, and the legal pad I had been filling. Lena bagged food, documents, and my backup keys. We left furniture, tools, and half my kitchen behind because weight and time were the wrong priorities. At 10:12, I called dispatch again from my truck with photos sent and report numbers ready. The woman who answered was polite and exhausted. No unit available. Wildlife transfer pending. If there was an active threat, shelter in place or relocate voluntarily. I asked for escalation. She said she would note the request. I knew that tone. It meant paper moved, not people. At 10:39, Don Kersey picked up on the second ring. "You still at the Mercer place?" he asked. "No. Clearing my rental now." "Good. Keep daylight movement only. Avoid old scales, decommissioned spurs, and water crossings near dusk. It uses edges." I told him about the removed camera and the glove on the mat. He was silent for a beat. "That is boundary behavior," he said. "Not feeding behavior. It is pressure." "Can you come out?" "I can, but I am one old man with a spotlight and a pension truck." "You need distance, neighbors, and predictable routes." That was the crux of it. Every person who believed me gave the same advice, and none of it solved the immediate geometry. My work, Roy's house, and Grinwood Corridor were linked by roads that pinched into blind turns and tree-lined choke points. We could shift where we slept, but we could not erase the map overnight. By 11:30, we were back at Roy's place, with my duffel in the mudroom and my truck parked nose out. Roy brought in a steel toolbox I had never seen opened and laid contents on the table, with a care that made me pay attention. Road flares, chem lights, heavy tow chain, bolt cutters, 2 high-lumen work lamps, spare batteries, and the old bolt action with fresh cloth wrap around the stock. Lena watched him stage everything and said, "This is not your first contingency kit." "No," Roy said. At 12:05, Cam called. "I need a favor and I know the timing is bad," he said, already defensive. "Hensley has one loaded rig sitting at the old Grinwood way station. Driver walked off shift. If that load sits overnight, we eat the penalty. You know that route better than anybody. Grab it. Bring it through Lowell. Done. I told you daylight only. It is daylight now. I looked out Roy's window. Low cloud had dropped again, gray and thick, the kind that burned off late and came back fast. I am not doing another solo night run up there. Then do it this afternoon. Be down by dark. I will owe you. Roy shook his head hard the moment he heard enough to understand the call. Lena mouthed no from across the table. I should have listened to both of them. I still hear that moment. I told Cam I would do one transfer, one route, and I wanted Hensley Yard to confirm gate access on radio before I moved. He agreed too quickly. At 118, we built a plan that looked solid on paper. Roy would follow in his Ford with flood bar and rifle, 100 yards back on open stretches, closer at choke points. I would take the loaded truck from the way station straight to Lowell and stop only for obstacles that physically blocked the lane. Lena would wait at the all-night fuel stop with her phone on and a first aid kit in her car. We set check-in times at each marker and wrote them on my dash in grease pencil. 3:10 depart Roy, 4:05 scales, 4:40 marker 14, 5:20 Lowell canopy. At 2:47 we rolled. The first hour stayed ugly but ordinary. Light rain, mud spray, engine vibration through the seat. Roy's headlights steady in my mirror when road opened, disappearing and reappearing on curves. I kept the CB volume low and listened for his 2-click signal every few minutes. At 3:59 we pulled into the abandoned way station lot. Concrete islands, cracked with weeds. Old-scale house windows boarded. Rusted warning signs, hanging by one bolt. A yellow skidder sat dead near the fence, with a hydraulic sheen pooled black beneath its rear assembly, probably from a blown line months earlier. I noted it without thinking and climbed into the Hensley rig. At 4:11 we had the load checked and chains tight. Roy walked my driver's side and touched the door twice, an old field signal from his logging days that meant stay sharp, move now. I nodded, dropped it into gear, and pulled toward the exit lane. In the side mirror I saw him stop at the inner post to clear the gate chain and sweep the rear approach with his light. The silence hit halfway to the gate. No rain on the windshield, even though droplets still slid across the glass. No raven calls from the cut. No wind in the wire grass by the barrier. The engine sounded too loud because everything else had fallen out. Then the CB detonated into white static so hard it clipped and snapped through the speaker cone. I keyed twice for Roy. No answer. Static only. At 4:16 I cleared the first barrier and glanced in the side mirror for his headlights. Nothing. I braked, rolled to a stop, and tried him on phone. No signal. Tried again. One bar, then gone. The lot behind me sat empty except for the dead skidder and the scale house shadow. I told myself Roy had dropped back to check the gate chain. Maybe radios failed in weather in old valleys. I held to that because the alternative was that I had lost my only backup in the one place Kersey told me to avoid. At 4:19, movement flashed on the far side of the lot near the boarded office. Too quick for shape. A dark mass crossing between concrete pillars. Not on 4 legs. Upright for 2 strides, then low again. I shoved the truck into reverse to widen angle and fired the floodlights mounted over the cab. The full beam washed the way station in hard white and gave me everything I had been missing. It stood 20 feet off my front bumper, fully exposed between the scale lane and the old barrier wall, and scale landed in my body like impact. 7.5 feet, maybe a little more when it straightened. Built like a predator, designed by compromise and force. shoulders huge and rounded with muscle, deltoids overdeveloped, forearms thick and long enough that its hands hung near the top of its knees when it crouched. The torso narrowed fast at the waist, into lean hips and digitigrade legs that loaded like springs, hock joints angled back, feet long and narrow with splayed toe, spread for traction on slick ground. Its fur was dark charcoal over most of the body, but rain had parted it in ridges that showed old scar lines across the right flank, pale seams crossing over each other like wire cuts and healed grazes. The chest fur was thinner, matted to skin by rain and breath, and every inhale expanded in that same three-beat pattern I had heard at my porch, wet and rattling at the end of each cycle. The neck rose almost human in posture, not horizontal like a wolf, supporting a long muzzle with lips pulled unevenly back over layered teeth. The canines were too long for any local predator, not clean white, more ivory and stained. Saliva threaded from the lower jaw and snapped when it moved its head. The eyes were the worst part because they were not vacant. Amber with green reflection under direct light, yes, but focused with tracking intent. It scanned me, then the mirrors, then the lock post on my passenger door, then the flare gun clipped beside my seat, then the chain binder lever by my left knee. It was reading the cab. Its ears pivoted independently, one toward my engine idle, one toward the tree line behind me. When it shifted weight, I saw a hitch on the right side, a guarded load that matched Roy's note from the cast. Injured, not weak, adapted. I had spent days trying to force this thing into a known category. Standing there under floodlights, it refused every one. It was one entity, one intelligence, one territorial hunter that had learned our routines and pushed until I was isolated at the edge of its corridor. At 4:20, it moved. Not a warning bluff. A direct rush at the driver's side and a low, explosive sprint that covered the first 10 feet almost silent, then hit the concrete lip with a crack and launched. I slammed the passenger lock, killed the floodlights to blind adjust its vision, and yanked 2 road flares from Roy's kit. My hands were steady because panic had burned off into procedure. Strike 1 hit my door like a sledge. The frame buckled inward with a shriek of steel, and glass spidered across the side window. The whole cab rocked. I jammed 1 flare against the igniter strip, and it flared red-white in my fist. Second strike scraped down the pillar, claws carving 4 bright lines through paint to metal. I threw the first flare under the rear axle where that old hydraulic pool had spread across broken concrete. The flare skidded, spun, then caught the thin film with a whoomph of orange flame that ran low and fast along the stain. Smoke rolled thick and greasy under the trailer bed. The creature circled through it and hit again, this time higher on the door seam, teeth flashing at the window edge. I lit the second flare and pitched it toward the barrier to widen the firelight and force contrast. Then I reached for the log chain on the side rack, popped the binder latch with the crowbar, and fed the loose end down with my left hand while I dropped the truck into reverse. The chain spilled, sparked in the flames, and began dragging in an arc behind the rear wheels. I cranked hard right and backed fast. The burning links snaked across the lot, then jumped when they caught around the creature's lower right leg. It lunged, twisting to clear, and that half second of drag gave me 1 shot. I slammed reverse throttle and pinned it against the concrete barrier at the gate corner. Impact shuddered up through the frame. The creature roared then, first full vocalization I had heard, deep enough to vibrate the steering column. Not animal panic, rage and pain layered together. It hammered one forearm against the hood, claws punching through thin steel near the fender line, and snapped the chain free with a violent wrench that sprayed burning links across wet concrete. I shifted to drive and punched through the half-hung gate. Metal screamed, post snapped, and the truck lurched onto the downhill lane. In the mirror, I caught it clear in flare smoke, fur along the right leg burning in strips, gait broken into a hard limp that turned to three-legged drive for a few strides, then back to uneven pursuit. It charged once more up the center lane, gained, then faltered when the smoke plume and engine blast hit it full. At 4:24, I reached the first straightaway and never looked back for 5 full seconds. When I checked the mirror again, it was at the shoulder above the road cut, silhouetted against fire glow, chest heaving, one hand braced on the bank. It did not drop onto the lane. Static screamed over the CB at mile marker 14, and then cut dead as I cleared the bend. At 4:31, I crossed the river bridge with both hands welded to the wheel and my breath coming in short, hard pulls. I checked mirrors once at midpoint, once at the far end. Empty road. No eyes in the guardrail gaps. No shadow pacing the tree line. Whatever line it held, it ended at that bridge. I kept driving toward Lowell with the door skin peeled open in 4 clawed grooves, and the cab stinking of flare smoke, hydraulic burn, and fear. I kept driving toward Lowell with the door skin peeled open in 4 clawed grooves, and the cab stinking of flare smoke, hydraulic burn, and fear. At 4:43, I came under the canopy lights at the fuel stop, and the brightness made my vision tunnel for a second, like my body had decided the danger window had closed and could finally shake apart. Lena was already there, standing by pump 3 in a rain jacket over clinic scrubs, one hand up like she was signaling a plane. I braked crooked and stopped half across 2 lanes. When I opened the door, it sagged on torn metal and dropped an inch, and I nearly went down with it because my left shoulder had gone numb to the fingertips. Lena caught my elbow, then jerked her hand back when she saw the blood from glass cuts at my forearm. "Sit down," she said. "Now." "I'm fine." "You are in shock, Travis. Sit." I sat on the curb by the air hose, flare soot on my sleeves, rain ticking on the canopy, diesel rumble from an idling rig somewhere behind me. I kept trying to explain sequence and timestamps and what it did at the barrier, but my words kept clipping short. Lena crouched in front of me, checked my pupils with her phone light, then pressed a clean towel from her car kit against my arm. The night clerk, Miguel, stepped out with a first aid box and stared at the truck door. "What did that?" he said, then looked at me and corrected himself. "Never mind. Ambulance is 5 minutes out." At 4:52, Roy's Ford came in hot, rear quarter scraped, mud up to the windows. He got out with his coat half burned along one sleeve and a cut over his eyebrow. He saw the door damage, saw me on the curb, and his face went blank in that hard way I had only seen once before at my grandfather's funeral. "You crossed the bridge?" he asked. "Yeah." He nodded once. "Good." The ambulance crew loaded me and wanted him in a second unit, but he waved them off and followed in his truck. On the ride to urgent care in Springfield, I stayed conscious by calling out mile markers and road signs exactly as they passed. The medic asked simple orientation questions. I answered all of them and still could not stop my right hand from shaking. By 5:37, I was in a treatment bay with a sling on my shoulder, oxygen line under my nose, and a nurse picking glass dust out of my cheek with tweezers. Soft tissue strain, partial dislocation, smoke inhalation, multiple superficial lacerations. No fractures. My blood pressure was high enough they took it 3 times. When the nurse stepped out, Roy came in, set both hands on the bed rail, and looked at the gauze on my arm before he looked at me. "Now you know why I never talked," he said. I nodded because speaking would have cracked something loose I was barely holding together. At 7:10, a deputy came to take a statement after dispatch, cross-linked my old report numbers with the way station fire call. He stood at the foot of the bed with a tablet, polite and wary, eyes cutting twice to Roy and once to the torn sleeve in the evidence bag. "What happened at the station?" he asked. I gave him what I could prove without using a word he would dismiss on contact. Unknown large animal strike, driver-side impacts, emergency use of road flares, gate breach during escape, fire self-limited by rain and concrete breaks. He asked if I'd been drinking. I said no. He asked if I had hallucination history. I said no. He asked if I could identify species. I held his gaze and said, "No reliable identification." He exhaled through his nose, typed for a while, then said the line I had expected. "If you add dramatic claims later, that complicates false report statutes. Stick to documented damage." After he left, Lena stood by the sink with her jaw tight and said, "There is no box for this in their system." There was not. That was the whole problem. At 9:02, back at Roy's kitchen table with my shoulder braced, we laid out every physical item and assigned a path so nothing drifted into rumor. Roy's 1998 mirror and my truck door photos went into one folder with dates. The plaster cast from my ditch line got wrapped and tagged. The 2 hair bags from Gate 3 and blackberry thorns went into sealed jars from Lena's clinic supplies. The glove from my porch stayed bagged as handled evidence. The bent SD card and corrupted camera files were copied to 2 flash drives. One stayed with me, one with Roy. The missing trail camera was marked unrecovered after a 3-day daylight grid search of my lot, Roy's lower field, and the ditch corridor. At 10:30 the next morning, I filed 3 reports and kept each confirmation number in my legal pad. Property damage update at my rental, vehicle damage report for the truck, and incident narrative for the way station gate and fire. In every one, I stayed inside observable facts. Scrapes, gouges, impacts, removed equipment, unknown animal. The county response came 48 hours later by email. Nuisance wildlife. No further action unless human fatality. Recommend secure attractants and avoid remote travel at night. They closed the file. I took the cast and hair samples to a private lab in Eugene because I wanted something external, not just our own notes. The technician was careful and kind, and 2 weeks later the report landed exactly where these cases always land. Mixed degraded mammalian material, contamination from rain and handling, insufficient markers for species-level certainty. The cast was classified as atypical impression with possible substrate distortion, useful words if your goal was uncertainty, useless words if your goal was safety. 2 older loggers, Jeb Nolan and Al Sutton, came to Roy's place one evening after shift and looked through the photos without jokes. Al touched the image of my truck door, then pulled his hand back like it might burn him. He told me he had seen eyes above a slash pile in 2007 near a decommissioned cut and never reported it, because his foreman laughed before he finished the second sentence. Don Kersey came the same night, listened to the full timeline, and said my bridge observation matched older incident boundaries he had tracked off record. He did not call it by any official name. He only said, corridor predator, high cognition, avoid overlap. By January 17th, 6 weeks after the way station, I quit all night hauling. Cam signed the transfer paperwork in the job trailer with no speech, just a long look and a pen pushed across the clipboard. Day pours in, Eugene, he said. You are off mountain routes after dark. I can cover the rest. I sold the Grinwood rental lease out at a loss and moved to Springfield, into a compact place on a lit block with neighbors close enough to hear if someone yelled. The first night there, Roy helped me install reinforced strike plates, 2 motion floods, and thermal cameras covering front walk, side gate, and rear alley. Lena sat at the kitchen counter with a printed checklist and called out each test while I triggered sensors one by one. Camera 1 pinged. Camera 2 pinged. Floods fired. Door braces seated. It felt obsessive, and it felt necessary. At 8:40 that same night, Roy unfolded a county road map on my new table and marked 3 evacuation routes in grease pencil, then made me drive each one in daylight the next weekend until I could run them without GPS. Every Sunday after that, we kept our old ritual but changed the task. Range practice, vehicle checks, radio battery rotation, and review of emergency contacts. We still didn't do emotional speeches. We did practical work, which was our version of trust. Lena and I changed too. She did not believe fully until she saw the truck door in person and watched Roy panic during cleanup when dusk hit and the neighborhood dogs went silent all at once. After that, denial stopped being part of our language. We used plain rules instead. No isolated trails after sunset. No dead-end roads without 2 vehicles. No splitting up at rural stops. Share live location if either of us ran late. It was rigid, but it gave shape to the fear and kept it from running the whole house. Some friends drifted. Camping invitations stopped when I kept refusing. Late bar nights got replaced by polite texts I never answered because I did not do dark parking lots and mountain drives for fun anymore. I missed parts of the old life. I did not miss pretending. I live in Springfield now, and this happened years ago, not last week. I still work construction, mostly foundations and municipal flat work. Daylight shifts only. I still pass through Lowell sometimes on controlled routes, and every time I cross that river bridge, I check my mirrors twice, even at noon, even in traffic. The response lives in muscle now. Twice a month, I sit in a therapist's office and do the unglamorous work of trauma processing. Not monster talk, just pattern interruption, sleep conditioning, panic management. I use a white noise machine every night because sudden silence still spikes me awake. If neighborhood dogs cut out all at once, my body goes alert before my mind catches up. I can feel my pulse in my hands, the same as that night under the canopy lights. It passes faster than it used to. The locked file is in a fire safe in my hall closet. Photos of the clawed door, measurements from Roy's graph paper, lab reports that resolve nothing cleanly, dispatch numbers, county closure emails, printed stills from corrupted camera frames, my legal pad pages with timestamps and weather notes. I keep them because memory blurs around fear and records keep me honest. They also keep me from gaslighting myself on hard days, when the whole thing feels too far outside ordinary life to have happened to a man like me. Some threads never opened. The deputy who warned me about false reports never called again after the file closure. Vera at Dawn Diner stopped asking why I quit night routes, and just refilled my coffee when I came in after day shifts. Cam never told me what Hensley wrote internally about the way station damage, and I never asked. Those silences stayed where they were. The threads that mattered did resolve. Roy finally told me his 1998 night in full, every detail down to the dent pattern on his old truck. We matched locations and timing against my map and found the same corridor years apart. Don Kersey retired for good and handed me copies of his private notes with names redacted, plus one sentence on top. Distance is survival, routine is armor. Lena and I stayed together because we stopped pretending fear was weakness and started treating it as data we could live around. I have not seen it again since the bridge. That is true. I do not claim a kill, a capture, or a final explanation because I have none. I know what I saw at 20 feet in floodlight. I know what tracked our doors, our schedules, and our weak points. I know it bled and burned, and still chose not to cross that river after the failed charge. Whether that line was territory, pain threshold, or something else, I respect it and stay on my side of it. My story is complete, even if the creature is not. I survived. I changed my work, my routes, my home, and my habits around what happened. I rebuilt my bond with my father while we were both still here to do it. I built a life that is smaller in some ways and steadier in the ways that count. I still scan tree lines when light drops. I still listen for dogs. And if the woods go quiet, I come home.